Your tip of the day is to brainstorm stretch goals before you launch, but don't announce them until after you fund. Now, a couple things I want to say about stretch goals. What stretch goals really are bonuses or new elements added to your campaign above and beyond your all or nothing funding goal. So when you launch a Kickstarter, you declare your project. Here's what I want to do. Here's the money I need to raise in order to do this thing. And then you basically build your 100% funding goal around the bare minimum that you'd need to deliver on your promises. Stretch goals are an opportunity to go above and beyond your initial promise or your initial scope of your campaign. Now, some crowdfunding platforms like BackerKit, for example, they actually have tools to formalize stretch goals and to track them and to officially unlock them on the platform itself. And there's a place where you can look at the stretch goals. And it's on Kickstarter as of right now. They're still not a platform feature, but they're a creator managed strategy. And so many creators will still use stretch goals and will do it their own way. They'll monitor them, they'll keep track of them, they'll announce them. That is something that has been a feature for Kickstarter for as long as I've been launching projects on Kickstarter, and that's over 12 years now. Some common campaigns, stretch goals that comic book creators tend to use are things like upgraded covers and paper stock. It could be things like bonus digital content and mini stories or mini comics to add. It could be things like page count expansions, additional pinup art or prints, new reward tiers or add ons that you will unlock, free upgrades for all backers. The important thing to know about stretch goals is they really serve two main purposes during your campaign. First, they can keep momentum going after funding. And when I mean momentum, I mean backers still coming in and funding still rolling in. They can also reward existing backers for helping them push the project forward. They basically can incentivize backers that jumped in on day one or day two or early in the campaign. They can incentivize them to stay locked in and glued into the campaign, rooting for the campaign success, continuing to push the campaign success because they recognize, oh, well, if this campaign does even better, my pledge may get even better. The product may get even better. The project may even be more awesome. And so it's a way to really keep momentum going after the campaign is funded and to especially reward the backers that have made it possible. Okay, so an example of stretch goals. I pulled this one from a recent comic book Kickstarter campaign that I ran. And you'll see for the stretch goals here, I've got a set of stretch goals that were roughly $2,000 apart in terms of how, when they would be unlocked. So the first stretch goal started at $21,000. And the first stretch goal was a live stream Q&A with the creators. Okay, so that was an example of a digital only stretch goal. Doesn't really add any cost to the campaign, but it's still something that we've had a lot of fun with in the past and hope to do it in the future. At 23,000, we did add 4 more pages to the Sync City of Killers book. I've found, in terms of asking backers and polling folks, that additional content in the book tends to be some of the most popular things that you could potentially offer as stretch goals. And so it's something that we try to do, especially for our graphic novel collections, where we have some flexibility in terms of page count. At 25,000, we added a new add-on. So we added a Sync shirt. And so this is an example of, it's not something that everybody gets for free. Like, I would never just say, okay, at this level, everybody gets a shirt. I'd probably never do that, just simply because shirts are a different product, different way to ship, they're costly, etc. That could be a budget buster for your stretch goals. But this shows that your unlock could be a new add-on. Now at 27K, this was a add-on that some backers would get. Backers that had selected a certain upgrade or a certain signed bundle. Well, we upgraded the bundle to include an extra sticker. At 29K, we went back and we added 4 more pages to the book. So that's something you can, if it works at a lower level, you can do it again. More is more. And you'll see we had some other things. A couple of those we actually unlocked in terms of additional pages. And it could even be something as simple as announcing a new project or sharing a preview of a new project. It could be adding an additional mini print or an additional, it could be anything, right? What the stretch goal is less important than you have something that you're working towards. Now, why should you plan your stretch goals in advance? There's a number of reasons why planning stretch goals in advance can definitely be the smart way to go. One of the first things is that planning in advance prevents the mid campaign scramble. Reality is, there's a lot that goes on in a Kickstarter campaign just on a daily basis to keep it running while your campaign is live. Having a plan before you launch is super, super helpful because then you can just execute the plan and you don't have to feel like you're building the airplane as you're flying it. Also, a lot of times, if your campaign happens to catch fire and you fund quickly, you don't want there to be big gaps or dead time before you're starting to roll out these stretch goals so that you can keep things rolling. Related to that, though, if you plan in advance, you have time to price your stretch goals appropriately. You can get quotes and get different cost analysis so that you know exactly what the cost difference is if you do, say, a spot UV upgrade on your hardcover, or if you add an extra 8 pages to the project. What's that actually going to cost in dollars? Given the time to properly plan that, you can make sure that that would be accounted for in any stretch goal funds that suddenly become available. What it also does, if you plan out your stretch goals in advance, is it gives you a vision of the ideal campaign journey that you want to take your backers on. So, a lot of times, what really can help is if we when we launch, we're trying to launch and we're trying to make sure that the bare minimum lovable version of our product can get out into the world. And that's sort of why setting an attainable, maybe a little bit smaller than you actually think you can raise, or then maybe a little bit smaller than you actually need goal can be a good strategy because it lets you start and then build from there. But I also encourage creators when I'm working with them is like, hey, define what that very minimum version of this project is, and then define what the greatest conceivable version of that project is. You may be able to use stretch goals to bridge the gap between the bare minimum and that like glorious, perfect vision. And if you can dream it, that is kind of the first step to making it all happen. Even if you don't unlock all of your stretch goals or all of them during this campaign, having a vision for what might be possible gives you a good roadmap to potentially making it happen. But also, an important thing is that you don't announce your stretch goals too early. There's a couple of reasons for this. First, it's presumptuous. I do feel like announcing stretch goals before you fund, especially if like you're at 20% funded and you still have thousands and thousands of dollars to go, and you're already talking about what you would do if you raised an additional thousands of dollars on top of that, it seems presumptuous. It might give off the wrong vibe, or that you're counting your chickens before they hatch, or you are focusing on hitting the moon before you've even left the ground, right? And so, likewise, if you haven't funded yet, talking about stretch goals takes the focus off of where it should be, and that's on milestone bonuses. And a previous tip on milestone bonuses that I shared earlier this week that goes over that strategy. But if you're just focused on stretch goals, or you're writing all about your stretch goals, you might miss out on the importance and power of using the milestone bonus strategy to get you to that 100% funded mark. And that's when you then roll out the stretch goals. Also, if you launch your Kickstarter page and already have your stretch goals listed on your page, it you risk tying your stretch goal like numbers to the wrong funding milestones if you set them in advance. I have a lot of Kickstarter experience under my belt. I roughly have a good idea of what campaigns are going to do or what they probably will do before I launch. But even then, Sometimes I get it wrong. I might be off by a couple $1,000 here or there. I do see some creators that launch with stretch goals already mapped out, and they end up unlocking like 5 stretch goals on day one. That would have actually been better. They would have been better served in most cases if those stretch goals had unlocked like throughout the first couple of days or weeks of the campaign. Because if they don't have an infinite number of stretch goals mapped out, they might be out of stuff to talk about during the campaign. And that's really what the last piece is. You're missing out on mid-campaign reveals and the power of surprises and things like that if you use all of your stretch goal announcements at launch. I like to make launch day about launch day and then go from there. Holding stretch goals back for just a little bit lets me extend my campaign messaging. So in short, this is built into the Comics Launch Planner. I wanted to make sure that you know that. The new planner will help you plan out not just those milestone bonuses, but also those stretch goals. There's a stretch goal strategy planner in the comic book crowdfunding planner. There's also dead zone checklists and other checklists, campaign management checklists that do incorporate stretch goal strategy in there. So I hope that helps there. But the important thing to take away from this is that stretch goals aren't just a reward for exceeding your campaign's success. They're actually a tool to help you create more success during your launch. When you plan them in advance and then deploy them throughout your launch, you'll feel like you're in the driver's seat on your next campaign.
Prepare to launch in 3, 2, 1.